When the forest speaks, they say silence in the wilderness isn't peace. Sometimes it's a warning. Across the vast wildlands of North America, stories persist, passed in whispers through generations, of creatures that don't quite belong, creatures that look like beasts but think like men, creatures that remember you. Though modern maps have carved boundaries and fences around military bases, deserts, and forests, the land never forgets who walked it first, or what. Among the Diné, more widely known as the Navajo, there's an ancient terror, a dark legend told in hushed tones, the Yenaldlushi, the Skinwalker. And despite the passage of time, these stories have not faded. They've only changed shape. The tale of Malcolm Brightwind. Malcolm Brightwind was a young Navajo man who had left the reservation in Arizona to work at a private ranch nestled deep in the Crimson Canyons of western Colorado, near a forgotten river gorge where the wind always sounded like distant whispering. This was in the early 1930s. The land he rode through was dry and wild, scattered with ash-gray rock spires and ancient petroglyphs long since swallowed by time. One cloudless evening, Malcolm left the ranch to visit his family across the border in New Mexico. He rode alone, cutting across desolate plateaus lit only by a blood-red dusk. As twilight fell and the stars began to burn bright above the desert, he stopped at a high ridge to rest his horse. There, sitting motionless on the hill opposite him, was a coyote, mangy, skeletal, its eyes like black pits. Driven by instinct, Malcolm raised his rifle and fired. The creature dropped instantly. But when he crossed the ravine to inspect his kill, what he found froze the blood in his veins. The body was no longer that of a coyote. It was half human. The upper torso was that of a young man, his chest painted in ritual symbols, hair long and matted, while his legs remained furred and twisted like that of a wild animal. Panicking, Malcolm dragged the body to a narrow crevice and shoved it over the edge, hoping to erase the memory. He then rode through the night in sheer terror, never stopping until he reached his uncle's cabin near Chaco Canyon. His relatives, upon hearing the tale, paled. "You shouldn't have touched it," his uncle whispered. "You have to stay here. You can't go back, not ever. The others, they'll be looking for you now." Whispers at Cinderfield Base. Decades later, in 1987, far from the dusty mesas, another story unfolded, this time at Cinderfield Military Installation, a remote outpost carved into the pine-choked valleys of northern Arizona. The base was notorious among its soldiers, not for enemy encounters, but for what they heard during midnight patrols. Private First Class Marcus Rourke and his partner were patrolling the southern fence line under a silver, cloudless moon. The only sounds were gravel underfoot and the occasional rustle of wind-blown leaves, until they heard a sound behind them, on the side of the base they had just come from. Turning, they saw an elderly man standing motionless in the moonlight, clad in tattered animal hides, his braided silver hair glowing. The air around him felt too still, too silent. They called out. He didn't move. They raised their weapons. Still no reaction. Marcus reached for his radio, but only static hissed back. He turned for a split second to adjust the frequency. And when he looked back, the man was gone. In his place sat a grotesquely large jackrabbit, its body unnaturally still, its eyes fixed on them like it understood everything. Then, the rabbit bolted toward the fence and was gone. As they spun around, the old man reappeared, this time on the other side of the fence. There was no gate. The fence was 10 feet high, wrapped in razor wire. And yet there he stood, unmoving, watching. Neither soldier ever filed a report, but Marcus never forgot. Years later, when he was drunk at Thanksgiving, he whispered, "I think we saw a skinwalker." His voice shook as if the memory had only just happened. The thing that spoke in the woods. During the 2021 wildfires in Northern California, Corporal Eli Black, a National Guard officer, was stationed near a burning stretch of forest, working with a small crew to prevent civilians from entering danger zones. They were parked near a scorched checkpoint when they heard it. A scream. Not an animal, a woman. Terrified, they raised their rifles and scanned the tree line. Then, from the woods, in their own lieutenant's voice, came a perfect mimic. "Hello." It wasn't an echo. It was mockery. Everyone piled back into their trucks, doors locked, weapons ready. One man muttered, "That's not human." Final encounter. The Quantico Beast. Sergeant Nathan Redfield, a military police officer stationed at the remote west side of Quantico, Virginia, had always felt at ease in the wilderness. But one night, while checking a game camera deep in the forest, he saw something that would ruin his love for the outdoors forever. From the perch of his tree stand, he noticed what he thought was a deer in the clearing. But it began smashing its skull against a tree again and again until bone and brain leaked down its face. Then it stood up, facing him despite clearly destroyed eyes, and said, "I know you're there." Nathan fled. He left everything behind, his camera, his stand, his gear. He never hunted in that part of the base again. When he told his grandfather, a Navajo medicine man, the old man only said, "You should not speak of it again." Across deserts, forests, and forgotten roads, the stories pile up. From Marines to MPs, old ranch hands to young cadets, the legends haven't faded. They've evolved. And always, at the heart of them, is the same terrible truth. Animals aren't supposed to talk.